Are you interested in learning more about how to advocate for children in pediatrics? Have you ever thought about being a primary care pediatrician? Or maybe you want to learn about what it's like to grow up in a small town and go on to become a pediatrician and advocate for those in those smaller communities. Well, you're in for a treat today with our episode with Dr. Jessica Young. She's my colleague and a faculty member at UNC School of Medicine in Chapel Hill, and she and I had an amazing conversation about what it's like to be primary care pediatricians. Let's jump right into the episode. Roll the music. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Jasmine Weiss. I'm the host of the Black Med Connect podcast, affectionately known as the BMed podcast. Here we share inspiring stories of Black physicians and physicians in training. I have a fantastic guest with me today, Dr. Jessica Young. She's also an early career faculty member and colleague with me at UNC Chapel Hill. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. We're here to talk about all things early career and your journey. And I'm just excited to let the audience hear your story and hear all about what you do.
Perfect. Well, let's start on in.
Yes. So can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your background, and what inspired you to pursue medicine?
Sure. So I am originally from a very small town in rural northeastern North Carolina that most people have probably never, ever heard of, even if you're from North Carolina. But it's called Hollister. It's in Halifax County. And so that's kind of where I grew up. That's where most of my family still live. And that's also where I met my husband. We met in high school. So that's where I grew up. I went to college at North Carolina A&T State University, Aggie Pride.
Okay, and we'll give you that.
I'm going to come back to that later. And went to medical school at the Preventive School of Medicine at East Carolina University. And then from there, did pediatrics residency in Charlotte, Atrium Health Living Children's Hospital. And so just to back up and talk a little bit about kind of how I ended up in medicine in general, or how I became interested. It was kind of a growing, passion and interest, you could say. When I was a little kid, when I had my first dream of thinking about what I wanted to be, I actually said a dentist. And so I guess that's kind of where I started to get an interest in the healthcare field, although I didn't really understand why. I don't really have a good reason why I wanted to be a dentist at the time. But as I grew older and got into high school, I started to take more science classes and had the opportunity to take a high school anatomy and physiology course. And I really loved it, loved it. So I think that was the first time I was like, oh, maybe I should think about, pursuing something in the healthcare field. And by then I really knew I loved kids. I just loved being around children. I was always the kid trying to be the mama to the other kids. So I knew I loved kids already. And so that was, it's kind of brewing, right? But when I got to college, I had the opportunity to shadow a pediatrician local to the area and just realized that I really loved pediatrics and was pretty locked in to wanting to be a pediatrician at that point, because I really liked how pediatricians were very family-oriented, family-focused during visits, but I also liked that they were out in the communities, giving back and doing other things outside of the office. And I really felt like that part spoke to me just as a person in general, in addition to what I wanted to do career-wise. And so that's kind of how I ended up, or had my interest started in pediatrics.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love like you said, the advocacy piece of our job and getting to step outside of the office and do different things with children. It's really, really meaningful. Can you tell me, what was it like when you started shadowing? How did you get that role or that opportunity?
Yeah, so I was in a student-led organization in college, a Minority Association of Pre-Medical Students, which is the college kind of chapter of SNMA. And so through that program, we had the opportunity to connect with mentors, and I was paired with him, and he was a Black pediatrician in Greensboro, Dr. Chris Miller. So if he happens to listen to this, I want to give him a shout out.
Shout out to Dr. Miller.
Shout out to Dr. Miller. He helped me down over the years, but he was great. And I just connected with him immediately. And, obviously having a Black physician mentor was like super important for me. So he's just been a great role model and continues to be a great mentor for me. But that's how I got connected to him. And so I was in that program, and they paired us with mentors in the community and tried to target other like Black and minoritized physicians in the community to pair us with. So I was very fortunate to end up with him as my mentor.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll shout out my mentor too, Dr. Jonathan Edwards, who I got to shadow. And it's so interesting how I've kept in touch, and I'm imagining you keep in touch with Dr. Miller or have kept in touch over the years. And that role that they play in really kind of helping you navigate and just knowing you can do it. I remember that very vividly with my mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Miller has, like I said, he's definitely helped me down over the years. And yeah, we still keep in touch. He sends me a Christmas card every year of him and his beautiful family. And yeah, he's just a great role model to have. So very, very thankful for him.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you mentioned the Minority Association of Pre-Med Students, which is, like you said, the little sibling of the Student National Medical Association for medical students. Can you talk a bit about what your experience was like at A&T overall and how that kind of shaped your journey as a fellow HBCU graduate, a Rattler, hence the orange today. We connect in that way. So Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would love to talk about my time at A&T. So yes, I am a proud Aggie. I graduated there in 2013, and I got my degree in chemistry. And my experience there was just the best 4 years of my life. It's the only way I can put it. Just being at an HBCU was just, and I'm sure, Jasmine, you can totally relate to this. I know we've had conversations about this, but just being in such a supportive atmosphere with like-minded people who have, goals, are very goal-oriented like yourself, but you also feel kind of comfortable in your own skin, and it's your own culture and you're familiar with everything. It was just like the best of both worlds. It's the best way I can describe it. And, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I had an idea that I wanted to go to medical school, or that I wanted to be a doctor, like going into college. And so I was very excited to hear about the MAPS program at A&T. So immediately got plugged into that as soon as I got there. And just being in that program was just very eye-opening for me. It exposed me to a lot of opportunities, including like shadowing with Dr. Miller, like I mentioned, but also we got to take field trips. I remember going to UNC School of Medicine and interacting with the students involved in the SNMA chapter there. And again, just being exposed and hearing about other people who look like me and had similar experiences to me doing the things that I wanted to do was just very inspirational. So I want to give another shout out to Dr. White, who is the kind of advisor for the MAPS program at A&T, and she still is. And she does an amazing job with just making sure the students in that chapter are well connected to people who are doing the things that they want to do with their lives. And she's just very supportive. She keeps in touch with all of us and makes sure that we're still doing well. She really is the reason behind so many success stories of people that came out of that chapter.
Absolutely. Yes. Shout out to Dr. White. I know her as well, and she is phenomenal. And just being able to connect with her and all of the programming that they do and the virtual conferences that they do for the students now that are there currently. So shout out to Dr. White. And I'll shout out Ms. Banks from FAMU as well, who's not there anymore, but was the advisor who, it's so interesting. You kind of have these pillars who play these roles for you and help you navigate the journey. So just because we're in that mode right now, what advice would you share for a college student who's thinking about medicine and maybe wants to think about going to medical school?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say try to identify mentors early. I think that was really key for my personal journey. I had this passion to go to medical school and to become a pediatrician, but it was really helpful to have those mentors very early on, just to kind of help coach me and guide me through the little things that I just didn't know I would need. So like when to take certain classes or the classes that I needed to take. And when it was time to write my personal statement, just having somebody to be able to review that who is familiar with personal statements for medical school and just little things like that. Having those mentors was very, very valuable. And so if you can identify a mentor very early on, a good one, hang on to them, use them, because it was very helpful for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if we could talk a little bit about kind of your transition into med school and residency, can you share, I know you knew kind of in college that you were interested in pediatrics. How'd you navigate in med school to ultimately decide, okay, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, so I'll get to that, but I guess I'll just share too that the transition from undergrad to medical school was rough. I'll just say that. It was challenging. I'll say it was challenging. It was a different environment and it was a different style of learning, as you know. A lot of people will say, and I heard this coming into medical school too, that, going into medical school or being in med school is like drinking from a fire hose.
Yes.
So I heard that a lot. I heard that a lot. But when I got there, I was like, oh, this is what they mean.
This is literally a fire hose.
It's just like stuff coming at you all the time. And you just have to like study. And so it was a challenge to kind of go through that transition. And I did pretty well, but I had a lot of stress and anxiety with that transition and a lot of like self-doubt and just tanks on my self-esteem that I had to work through like that first semester. And so I remember, and I'm just like shouting out everybody today. But
That's okay. That's what we're here for.
Dr. Sandy Achiampong, who was kind of one of our advisors at my medical school, and she's a Black lady. And I remember going to her at the end of the first semester. And again, my grades were pretty good. I had done well, but it was just like the stress of everything. And I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And I went to her office. I was like, Dr. A, I think I'm done. I think I want to leave. I don't know if this is what I want to do. Like, I really like the idea of being a physician and I think it speaks to me as a person, but this ain't it. So I remember going to her and she was like, well, just think about it. Just stop for a minute. And she gave me the steps. She was like, if you really want to quit, this is what you need to do. But I see a lot of potential in you. I think you're doing really well. And I think you just need help kind of talking through some of these issues that you're internalizing. And so she helped me so much and was really the reason I was like, okay, I'm going to stay in there and give it one more semester and we'll see. And after like talking with her and having her help, like it just totally changed things for me. So I want to really give her credit for that. And also I found a really good group of friends in medical school who are like some of my closest friends till this day. Love them dearly. And they helped me down during medical school too. And so I don't think I would have made it without Dr. A and with my group of friends. So I just wanted to say that to encourage anybody who might be listening that is maybe in med school or considering it and heard horror stories or whatever the case may be. It's a transition, but it is 100% doable for sure. You just have to find your support system and stay in the grind, but it is definitely doable. So that was not really a question. I'm going to answer your question.
No, that's fantastic because I think we sometimes when we look back at the story, we can tell it in a much more straightforward way that you don't always have the emotional response that you used to have, and thinking about the stress that we were under, the amount of work that you have to consume, the amount of studying you have to do. So I'm glad you shared that with our audience. What were some of the things you mentioned your friends and as a strong support system, and you mentioned Dr. A as a person to kind of confide in? Were there some other things that you used during that time that maybe our listeners can think about too?
I really just so it was a balance. I had my people in medical school, again, my group of friends I just love them so much. They're an amazing group of physicians. But I had them as my kind of support in school because they could understand and relate to me with what I was going through with medical school, but also just who I identified as a person. So it was very helpful to have them in medical school, but I also heavily leaned on my family, my boyfriend at the time who became my fiance during medical school, my support system outside of family. So for me, it was very important to kind of have that balance because my family didn't really understand what I was going through in medical school. All they could see was, it's Jessica and she's done so well during life and she is so high achieving. And I know she says it's a lot, but I know she's going to get through it because she's amazing. And I needed that. But there were also times where I didn't need that. And I just needed to talk to people who were also very high achieving, but understood like this is a lot. Yeah, it's hard. So I think having that balance really helped me. And I think once I just found my rhythm as far as how I needed to study, things kind of just leveled out. And once I figured out what I needed to do, I just need to do it and it would be helpful for me. And so part of like when I first started medical school was figuring out how to study because what worked for me in undergrad was not going to work in medical school. And so I played around with different things. I did study groups, playing around with different kind of learning opportunities and styles and really found what worked for me. And once I found it, I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to study my entire time here. So it worked out well. But, I think that could be different for different people. And so some people studied in study groups every single day. That was not for me. I use study groups, for example, in very specific times. Like if we were getting close to an exam and I needed a review or I wanted a review with other people to just kind of quiz each other. That was helpful, but being in a study group every single day was not a thing that worked for me, but it worked for some other people. Some people, didn't go to class at all. I needed to go to class. I went to class. I sat front row, took notes, asked questions. I needed that kind of supplement to my studying after class, but some people didn't need that. And so it's just different styles that work for different people. And so a lot of it, I think, is just finding out what really works for you and leaning on that as a way to learn the material in medical school.
Yeah. And you mentioned a great point. It's okay to try different things too. I think some people get frustrated when what they're used to doing, when it doesn't work, and they just get so flustered that they kind of don't know how to navigate. But like you said, having that spirit of I'm going to try and see if this works or this works and just kind of test it out, because you're right. It's so much material, it's so much material in medical school. And, I was similar in the sense that I like being in the same place with people, but not necessarily always talking out loud. So there was a balance of sometimes we'd be talking together to think through a concept and other times we're quietly studying, but in the presence of each other. So you have to learn that about yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Are you interested in taking a deeper dive with Black Med Connect? Then join our Black Med Connector newsletter. Each week, you'll hear more about our guests and go behind the scenes to get a deeper dive into their careers. You will get the professional productivity word of the week, and you'll get to see and learn more about amazing physicians doing wonderful things in entrepreneurship and innovation. So head on over to BMED Connect, bmedconnect.com/podcast and join the Black Med Connector newsletter. Back to the episode. And so now we're on the wards. Let's fast forward a little bit to we're on the wards, we're on our rotations. When did you fall in love with peds again, I guess you could say? And what was kind of the marker where you said, okay, this is what I'm going to do for sure?
Yeah. So when I went to medical school, again, I kind of had this idea that I would like pediatrics, but I didn't know. And I wanted to keep my options open because I felt like I had only had experience really with pediatrics with shadowing, and I didn't really know much about other medical specialties. And so I went in it with a very open mind. And by the time I started going through my rotations, I also had an interest in family medicine and also OB/GYN. And so I would say those were kind of the three I was thinking about at the time. But really, it all boiled down to being on my pediatrics rotation and just feeling like that's where I needed to be. I really enjoyed being around children. I really enjoyed being able to talk with families. I really enjoyed just the breadth of experiences that I could get in pediatrics and just the pediatricians that I had the opportunity to work with and communicate with, I just all felt like were really, really smart people, but also very down to earth, genuine people. And I just felt like I could relate to that. Like I just really loved the whole vibe of pediatrics. And so it just felt like the right fit ultimately. And then I just started ruling things out. Like, I mentioned I had some interest in OB-GYN. Now I thought about it. I was like, oh, I don't really like the OR. So I don't think I want to be in the OR. So I don't think that's going to work. But I like the OB aspect of it. But it was really, I like delivering the baby because then I would like to see the baby. And so
Exactly.
I was like, oh, well, maybe, OB-GYN is probably not the right fit. And then I thought back to family medicine. And when I thought about the kind of patient population I really wanted to see in a clinic setting, for example, it was always like babies up to young adults. And then after that, I started losing interest. No offense. I'm clearly an adult now and need great care. So shout out to my doctors, but it wasn't something that I was particularly passionate about. Like I was really passionate about seeing kids at a very early, young age and being able to have a lasting impact on them throughout their lives, whether that was to, take care of them medically, help them with any medical conditions that they might have, or just being like a mentor. And so I really could see myself in pediatrics for those reasons. And again, I really love kids. And so it really became a pretty effortless and easy decision for me once I really sat down and had a real conversation with myself about what I really liked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like you were a baby follower in a C-section too, right? When the baby popped out, I know I remember feeling like, okay, I just want to see what's happening with the baby now. Like, I hope mom's okay. I hope she's doing well, but let's go see what's going on with the baby.
Yep, exactly. Yep, exactly.
I love that. I love that. And so, you were balancing, you mentioned you were engaged in medical school. So you were balancing kind of getting married in a relationship and choosing pediatrics and where you would go. Can you talk a bit about how did you balance your family life as you started to make those decisions?
Yeah, well, I will say so I got engaged toward the end of my second year of medical school. I kind of knew that I didn't want to have a wedding until closer to the end of medical school. So we had a fairly longish engagement. So we got engaged February 2015 and we got married April of 2017. So it was a little over 2 years that we were engaged. And at the time, of course, I was in Greenville, North Carolina in medical school, and he was in Greensboro, North Carolina, where his job was at the time. And so it wasn't that far, but, we had to kind of navigate, especially with me being in medical school and just being so busy all the time. We had to just figure out the best schedule that worked for us, which usually meant he would come to me because I was so busy. So I was very thankful that he had a little bit more flexibility than I did, and he was able to do that. But he, has always been such a supportive person. And like I mentioned, we met in high school. And so I, at that point, even had been knowing him for years and years. And even before we started dating, we were friends for 2 years before that. And so I had known him for a long time at that point. And so I think, we just really understood goals for each other. And he knew that this was a kind of lifelong dream for me in a sense. And so he was very supportive and worked around my schedule whenever we could. And so I have to credit him for really making our relationship work and just being so understanding and supportive and giving me those pep talks when I needed it, when it was exam time. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I know this whole section. I just need to review because I just don't grasp anything. And he's like, calm down. You got this.
You got this.
So that part, I guess to answer your question, really was kind of easy for me. Because he just made it so easy. And planning a wedding, once I started planning into my third year, which is also when I started rotations, that part was a little bit challenging for sure. But I had my mom and my grandmother who was very supportive. They were both helpful and, just making sure I had everything that I needed from that standpoint. So I just always had a lot of support. And so I never want to say oh, I did all these things on my own. There was always this just very solid support system behind me at all times. And so I definitely want to credit them for that. But, nevertheless, it was still challenging to try to balance being a fiance, planning a wedding, and then, interviewing for residency and figuring out my rank list and transition to residency. Like it was a lot happening. It was a lot happening during that time. But, I don't think I ever felt like things were super overwhelming or super stressful just because my support system was just solid, supportive from day one. And just, I told them what I needed to do or what needed to happen. And they were like, bet, let's make it happen. So I think if I had not had that support system or it was not as solid as it was, then yes, for sure, things probably would have been a little bit more challenging. But I felt like, it went pretty well because of the people that I had in my corner. So
Awesome. Shout out to the husbands and significant others, boyfriends, girlfriends, whomever you may have, moms, dads, grandmas, aunties, everybody who, really makes it possible. I think, as you said, just being able to have someone to lean on, especially with so much, like you mentioned, just even, did that play a role in your decision of where to go for residency? Like, how did you kind of factor that in? Because some people say, my family's willing and we'll go anywhere versus staying close to home. Did you think about those things?
I did. I thought about that a lot. I mentioned earlier that I did my pediatrics residency in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I've always stayed in North Carolina. But, that was kind of toward the other side of the state, a little bit further from my family, who at that point and still are in the eastern part of the state. And so when I went to interview at the program in Charlotte, I immediately fell in love with it and kind of had an idea of, I think this is where I want to go. And it was my first interview. So I was like, am I being naive right now?
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was my first interview. So I was like, I'm probably just excited about interviewing for residency and just oh, that's so great. But I really did. I fell in love with it almost immediately and kind of had an idea that that's where I wanted to go. But I also knew that, I was getting married soon and I was already thinking about, what life would look like with kids and when we might have kids. And I didn't want to be too far from my family. And so I thought about those things as I was making my decision for sure. And my husband, again, he makes things so easy for me. It's really not fair, but he does. He was like, wherever you want to go, that's where we'll go. But obviously, I asked him well, where would you like to be? Is there any particular city or area that really excites you? And so he was really excited about Charlotte. We talked about Charlotte, or Atlanta was another city that we had interest in possibly moving to, especially because his brother was there at the time. But we, kind of came together, went through our list of things that was important to us and kind of landed on Charlotte. And luckily I matched there. And so we ended up there. But it was a really great fit for us both. And the entire 3 years we were there, we just loved it. Really loved it. It was such a great city to just start our marriage in and build a new network of friends there and find our places and activities that we enjoyed. Charlotte was really great to us. And I know that's your hometown.
Yes, shout out to my hometown, the Queen City. Love you guys.
Yes, we loved it there. But yeah, I definitely thought about those things again, especially because I was getting married and I was already starting to think about kids, and I knew I wanted my parents somewhat close to me when and if I, had a child. So yeah, definitely went into my decision making.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Black Med Connect podcast. And that was only part 1 with Dr. Young. We're so excited. If you want to come back and hear what else we discussed, join us next week for part 2. We'd appreciate it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Black Med Connect podcast. And if you like listening to podcasts, wherever you like listening on whatever platform, find us, look us up, the Black Med Connect podcast. We look forward to next week's episode with Dr. Young. And until next time, dream without limits. Bye.